The moment the docking clamps locked into place, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the silence that followed, the kind of silence that comes right before a storm. My name is Daniel Price, and 6 hours earlier, I had been told this was going to be the easiest assignment of my life. Escort the human peace delegation to a neutral space station. Shake hands. Sign papers. Come home, heroes. Nobody warned me that my hands would be shaking for a very different reason before the day was over. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. The war had lasted for 11 years. 11 years of burning colonies, of ships torn apart in the dark, of names read out loud on memorial broadcasts until the names started to blur together. The enemy called themselves the Serath Compact, a coalition of species that had decided humanity was a problem that needed to be solved before we grew too strong to stop. We fought them to a standstill, but a standstill is not a victory. It just means both sides are too tired to keep swinging. So when the Compact sent a message asking for peace talks, the entire human fleet held its breath. I remember the day the offer came through. I was stationed on a supply cruiser near the outer defense line, running maintenance checks on cargo systems that nobody thought were important until they broke. My commanding officer, a sharp woman named Laura Bennett, called every senior staff member into the briefing room and read the message out loud herself, because she did not trust anyone else to deliver news that big. The Compact wanted a summit, a real one. Neutral ground, an old derelict station called Halvorn Reach, sitting quietly in an empty stretch of space that belonged to nobody. Both sides would send a small group. No warships, no weapons. Just diplomats, translators, and enough goodwill to end a war that had cost both species more than either wanted to admit. Laura read the terms slowly, and I watched her jaw tighten with every sentence. Minimal personnel. No weapons of any kind. Humanity arrives first, as a gesture of good faith. The Compact delegation arrives second, once our ships have already left the area. Every instinct in my body said this smelled wrong. I had spent 3 years fighting these people. I had seen what they were capable of when they wanted to win. And now they wanted us to walk into a place with our hands open and nothing to defend ourselves with. I said as much, quietly, to Laura after the briefing ended and the room had cleared out. She looked at me for a long moment before she answered. Daniel, she said, do you think Command hasn't thought of that? I did not have an answer for her, because the truth was, I did not know what Command was thinking. All I knew was that 2 days later, my name appeared on the list of personnel assigned to the delegation. Not as a diplomat, not as a translator. My official title was Aide to the Security Coordinator, which sounded impressive until you realized the security coordinator was not allowed to carry a weapon either. The night before we left, I could not sleep. I sat in my quarters running numbers in my head, trying to convince myself that Command would not send an unarmed delegation into a Compact stronghold without some kind of plan. I told myself that whatever was happening, it was above my pay grade, and my job was simply to show up, do my part, and trust the people above me. That trust got a little easier to hold on to the next morning, when I walked past the cargo bay on my way to the shuttle and saw something that made me stop in my tracks. 6 large crates were being loaded onto our transport, each one marked with medical supply labels. Standard enough, except for one detail. The soldiers loading them were being far too careful, and the crates were far too heavy for medical supplies. I watched one crate get set down slightly too hard, and for half a second, I heard a sound come from inside it that did not belong to bandages or field kits. It was a low mechanical hum, brief and quiet, the kind of sound that comes from something with a power source. I did not say anything, I just kept walking, and I filed that sound away in the back of my mind like a soldier files away everything that might matter later. On the shuttle, I sat next to a young officer named Ethan Marsh, who had been assigned as a translator's assistant. Ethan was talkative in the way that nervous people often are, filling silence because silence made him uncomfortable. He told me about his family, about how his sister had begged him not to volunteer for this mission, about how everyone back home thought this peace summit was either the best thing that could happen to humanity or a terrible mistake dressed up in polite language. I asked him what he thought. He looked out the window at the stars sliding past and said, "I think we're about to find out." Across the aisle sat Grace Whitfield, the lead diplomat for our side, a calm and composed woman who had spent years negotiating trade disputes before the war even started. She wore a simple gray uniform with no rank markings, per the terms of the summit, and carried a single leather case that supposedly held nothing but documents. She caught me staring at it once and gave me the smallest smile, the kind that says I know exactly what you're thinking, and I am not going to confirm or deny anything. That smile told me more than any briefing had. The shuttle ride to Halvorn Reach took almost 14 hours. I spent most of it running through old memories of the war, trying to remember every account I had ever read about how the Sereth Compact fought when they thought they had the advantage. They were patient. They liked traps. They preferred to let their enemy believe they were winning, right up until the moment the ground disappeared beneath their feet. I thought about mentioning this to Laura Bennett, who was seated near the front of the shuttle, reviewing files on a small tablet, her expression unreadable. But I decided against it. If she was worried, she was not going to show it to a junior aide 6 hours before arrival. That was not how she operated. Instead, I turned my attention to the one crew member who had said almost nothing the entire trip. His name was Nathan Cole, and according to his files, he was a logistics officer responsible for organizing supplies once we reached the station. He sat quietly near the back, occasionally checking a small device strapped to his wrist, the kind of device that logistics officers do not usually carry. I caught his eye once. He gave me a short nod, the kind soldiers give each other when they recognize something familiar in a stranger, and then went back to staring at his wrist device. By the time Halvorn Reach came into view through the shuttle window, my nerves had settled into something colder and more focused. The station itself looked exactly like its reputation suggested, an old, half-abandoned structure built decades ago by a species that no longer existed, its metal hull scarred and pitted from years of drifting through empty space. It had been chosen specifically because it belonged to nobody, which made it the only place both sides could agree to meet without either one feeling like they were walking onto enemy territory. Except, of course, that was exactly what we were doing. As the shuttle approached the docking ring, I watched the exterior lights of the station flicker on one by one, activated by systems that had clearly been prepared in advance by someone. The compact ships had not arrived yet. According to the plan, they would not arrive until we had already docked and disembarked. That detail bothered me more than almost anything else. It meant that for the first hour on that station, we would be completely alone, completely unsupported, with no ship of our own nearby, and no way to leave in a hurry if something went wrong. Grace Whitfield stood as the shuttle began its final approach, smoothing down her uniform and taking a slow breath. She looked back at the rest of us, her expression calm, and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "remember why we came. We came to end a war, not to start a bigger one." I wanted to believe her. I wanted, more than almost anything, to believe that in a few hours we would be shaking hands with the people who had spent over a decade trying to destroy everything we loved, and that somehow, impossibly, it would all be over. But as the docking clamps locked into place with a heavy metallic clang that echoed through the shuttle, and the lights along the corridor ahead flickered on to reveal a long, empty passage leading deeper into the station, I felt that same cold certainty return to my chest. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, we were about to walk right into it. Ethan Marsh stood beside me, adjusting his collar with shaking hands. Nathan Cole moved past us both without a word, his wrist device tucked carefully beneath his sleeve. Laura Bennett took her position at the front of our small group, her back straight, her face calm, giving away absolutely nothing. The airlock door hissed open, revealing the corridor beyond, lit in a soft blue light that felt almost inviting. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped forward into whatever was waiting for us on the other side. The corridor smelled like recycled air and old metal, the kind of smell that told you a place had been empty for a very long time before somebody bothered to turn the lights back on. Our footsteps echoed strangely against the walls as we walked deeper into Halvorn Reach. 6 of us moving in a loose formation that Laura Bennett had arranged without ever giving an obvious order. At the end of the corridor, a wide door slid open to reveal a circular chamber that had clearly been prepared for this exact meeting. Long tables lined the outer edge, set with what looked like a formal dinner arrangement, and soft lighting fell from fixtures set into the curved ceiling. It looked less like a battlefield and more like a wedding reception, which somehow made me even more uneasy. Grace Whitfield walked to the center of the room and set her leather case down on the main table with practiced calm. I stayed near the back with Ethan Marsh, both of us scanning the chamber the way soldiers scan any unfamiliar space, counting exits, counting shadows, counting the places where something could hide. There were 4 exits from the main chamber, each one a wide door similar to the one we had entered through. I noted them without meaning to, an old habit from years of training that refused to switch off just because I had been told to leave my weapons behind. We did not have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, a low chime sounded from somewhere overhead, and one of the far doors slid open. The Seraph Compact delegation entered in a slow, deliberate line, and despite everything I had read about them, despite years of intelligence briefings and enemy profiles, seeing them up close for the first time still sent a shiver down my spine. They stood taller than us on average, with smooth gray skin that shifted slightly in tone depending on the light, and eyes that seemed to catch every reflection in the room. Their leader, introduced through a translation device as Vex Solan, moved with the kind of confidence that comes from either genuine goodwill or absolute control over a situation. I could not yet tell which one it was. Vex Solan approached Grace Whitfield and extended a hand in a gesture that was clearly meant to mimic our own greeting customs. Grace shook it without hesitation, her expression pleasant and unreadable. I found myself holding my breath. The formal proceedings began almost immediately. Vex Solan spoke through the translator, his voice smooth and measured, expressing gratitude for humanity's willingness to meet, expressing sorrow over the losses both sides had suffered, expressing hope for a future where our 2 peoples might coexist rather than destroy each other. It was, on the surface, exactly the speech we had all hoped to hear. And yet, as I stood near the back of the chamber, I could not stop noticing the small details that did not fit. The compact guards positioned around the room stood in a pattern I recognized from old battlefield reports, a formation designed not for ceremony but for controlling a space during a sudden confrontation. Their positions gave them clear lines toward every exit and every member of our delegation, while leaving very little room for us to maneuver if something went wrong. I glanced at Nathan Cole, who stood near one of the side tables, his wrist device catching the light for just a moment before he adjusted his sleeve to cover it again. He met my eyes briefly and gave the smallest shake of his head, a silent message that told me to stay calm and stay quiet. The negotiations continued for nearly 2 hours. Terms were discussed, borders were proposed. Grace Whitfield handled every exchange with a steady patience that impressed me more with each passing minute, pushing back gently when the compact terms leaned too far in their favor, conceding small points when it made sense to build trust. Vex Solan seemed genuinely engaged, occasionally consulting with the smaller compact delegates beside him, occasionally softening his position in ways that felt real. For a moment, sitting there listening to 2 exhausted civilizations try to find their way toward peace, I let myself believe it might actually work. Then I noticed the drones. They had been positioned along the upper edges of the chamber since we arrived, small spherical devices that the compact had introduced as observation equipment meant to record the proceedings for their government archives. I had not thought much of them at first, but as the negotiations wore on, I began to notice their movement patterns, small adjustments in angle and position that had nothing to do with recording a conversation and everything to do with tracking individual targets. I leaned toward Ethan Marsh, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "Those drones," I said. "Watch how they move." Ethan followed my gaze upward, and I saw the color drain slightly from his face as he understood what I meant. Before either of us could decide what to do with that information, A soft mechanical whine echoed through the chamber, so quiet that most of the room did not seem to notice it. I did. It was the same sound I had heard on the shuttle back home, coming from crates marked as medical supplies. The sound of a power source coming online. I looked toward the far side of the room, where two of our own delegation members stood near a serving table stacked with what appeared to be refreshments prepared by the station's automated systems. One of them, a quiet woman named Sophie Lang, who had been introduced to us only as kitchen support staff, adjusted something beneath the table with a movement so smooth and practiced that I almost missed it entirely. It was in that moment, watching her hands move with a precision that no kitchen staff member should have, that the pieces finally clicked together in my mind. The crates on the shuttle, the wrist device Nathan Cole kept hidden beneath his sleeve, the calm, knowing smile Grace Whitfield had given me before we boarded. None of this delegation was as unarmed as it appeared. Command had known. Command had planned for this from the very beginning. The realization should have brought me comfort, and in a small way it did. But it also meant one very clear thing. If our side had prepared a hidden response, it was because someone, somewhere in command, had expected the compact to break the terms of this meeting. I did not have long to sit with that thought. The reactor hum I had noticed earlier grew slightly louder, and I felt a subtle change in the air pressure around the chamber, the kind of shift that happens when a large system somewhere in a station begins drawing significant power. Vex Solon's voice continued smoothly through the translator, discussing border adjustments and resource-sharing agreements, but his eyes flicked briefly toward one of the compact guards near the far door, a look that lasted less than a second but told me everything I needed to know. He was waiting for something. I turned toward Laura Bennett, hoping to catch her attention, but she was already watching the same guard, her posture unchanged, her expression calm in a way that I now understood was not calm at all, but control. She had seen it too. Grace Whitfield continued the negotiation without missing a beat, her voice steady as she proposed a new clause regarding shared border patrols, buying time in a way that I only now recognized as deliberate. Every question she asked, every point she raised, was carefully drawing out the conversation, keeping the room occupied while something else moved into position behind the scenes. The chime that had announced the compact delegation's arrival sounded again, softer this time, almost hidden beneath the ambient hum of the station's systems. I felt the floor vibrate faintly beneath my feet, the telltale sign of heavy doors somewhere in the station beginning to seal. Ethan Marsh grabbed my arm, his grip tight with fear. "Daniel," he whispered, "the exits." I looked toward the 4 doors we had counted upon entering the chamber. All 4 had gone dark, their control panels shifting from a soft blue glow to a harsh red that needed no translation to understand. We were locked in. Vex Solon paused mid-sentence, and for the first time since we had arrived, his composed expression shifted into something colder, something that had been hiding beneath the surface the entire time. He looked toward Grace Whitfield with an expression that was almost apologetic, almost regretful, and yet utterly without mercy. "I am sorry it has come to this," he said through the translator, his voice losing the warmth it had carried moments before. "Your people fought harder than we expected, but a peace that leaves you strong enough to grow is not a peace my government can accept." The compact guards around the room shifted in unison, their earlier ceremonial postures dissolving into something far more purposeful. I felt my heart slam against my ribs as I realized we were standing in the center of a trap that had been set the moment this summit was proposed. Grace Whitfield did not flinch. She looked directly at Vex Solon, her expression calm even as the walls around us prepared to close in. "Then, it is a good thing," she said quietly, "that we did not come here quite as unarmed as your terms required." For a brief moment, confusion flickered across Vex Solon's face, the first crack in his composure since he had entered the room. And that confusion was the last calm moment any of us would have for a very long time. The chamber erupted into motion so quickly that my mind struggled to keep pace with what my eyes were seeing. The compact guards moved first, weapons rising from beneath their ceremonial robes with practiced speed, clearly confident that they were facing a delegation with nothing to defend itself. For half a second I felt the old, familiar fear of the war rushing back into my chest, the fear of standing in front of an enemy with nothing but empty hands. Then Sophie Lang moved. Her hands, which moments earlier had been arranging refreshments on a serving table, closed around a small device hidden beneath the tablecloth. She pulled it free in one smooth motion, and what I had assumed was a simple serving tray unfolded into something far more complex, a compact defensive system that hummed to life with a low, steady pulse. She positioned herself in front of Grace Whitfield without hesitation, her calm expression never once breaking. At the same moment, Nathan Cole tore the sleeve away from his wrist device and pressed it firmly against his forearm. The device expanded outward with a soft mechanical unfolding sound, forming a protective barrier that shimmered faintly in the chamber's light. He planted himself near one of the sealed doors, watching the compact guards with the focused stillness of someone who had trained for exactly this moment. I stood frozen for only a heartbeat before a hand grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. It was Ethan Marsh, but his terrified expression had transformed into something far more determined. He shoved a small device into my palm, one that had apparently been hidden inside his translator equipment the entire time. "Hold this the way I showed you in training," he said quickly, his voice steady despite everything happening around us. I stared down at the device in my hands, and for a strange moment, all my training from years ago came rushing back, the muscle memory of holding a weapon settling into my grip, as if no time had passed at all. I had been told I would arrive at this summit unarmed. Somebody, somewhere above my pay grade, had decided that was not entirely true. The first exchange happened almost too fast to follow. A compact guard lunged toward Grace Whitfield, only to be met by the defensive pulse from Sophie Lang's device, which stopped him in his tracks and sent him stumbling backward into one of the serving tables. Another guard turned toward Nathan Cole, only to find his approach blocked by the shimmering barrier that had unfolded from his wrist device, buying precious seconds for the rest of us to react. Laura Bennett, who had said almost nothing throughout the entire summit, suddenly moved with the confidence of someone who had been holding back her full self this entire time. She produced a compact device from beneath her uniform collar and used it to disable the nearest compact guard's weapon entirely, rendering it useless in his hands before he even understood what had happened. I realized, standing there in the middle of the chaos, that every single member of our delegation had been carefully chosen, not just for their diplomatic or logistical skills, but for something else entirely. We had not been sent here as an unarmed group hoping for the best. We had been sent here as a carefully disguised response to a threat that Command had clearly anticipated long before we ever boarded that shuttle. Vex Solan's expression twisted with something between shock and fury as he watched his carefully planned trap begin to unravel in front of him. He barked something sharp in his own language, and the remaining compact guards adjusted their formation, clearly realizing that this was not going to be the easy victory they had expected. Ethan Marsh guided my hands, showing me quickly how to aim the device he had given me, his voice calm despite the tension in the room. "Focus on the barrier projections," he said. "They cannot fire through them, but we can redirect their movement." I followed his instructions, aiming the device toward a compact guard who was attempting to flank Grace Whitfield from the side. A soft pulse of energy left the device and struck the floor near the guard's feet, disrupting his footing just enough to slow him down. It was not designed to cause serious harm, only to disable and disrupt, which told me something important about the nature of our hidden preparations. We had not come here planning to destroy anyone. We had come here planning to survive. Grace Whitfield remained remarkably composed throughout the chaos, directing our small group with calm, clear instructions, even as guards attempted to close in from multiple directions. Her diplomatic training, it seemed, extended far beyond simple negotiation. She had clearly been trained to lead in exactly this kind of situation, treating the sudden conflict with the same careful strategy she had used during the negotiation itself. "Move toward the eastern door," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise of the chamber. "That control panel is the weakest point in their lockdown. Nathan Cole immediately began working on the door's control panel, using tools hidden within his logistics equipment to bypass the security lock that had sealed us inside. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, clearly having trained for this exact scenario long before we ever left our home fleet. While he worked, the rest of us held our ground against the remaining compact guards, who seemed increasingly confused by the sudden shift in the balance of power. Sophie Lang's defensive barrier held steady, absorbing attack after attack, while Laura Bennett continued disabling weapons with calm precision. Ethan Marsh and I worked together, using our devices to keep the guards off balance, disrupting their formations before they could organize a coordinated attack. Vex Solon, watching his plan collapse in front of him, made one final desperate move. He reached toward a hidden control panel near the center table, clearly intending to trigger some kind of final measure against us. Grace Whitfield noticed the movement instantly and crossed the room with startling speed, closing the distance between them before he could complete the action. "I do not think so," she said calmly, using a small device of her own to disable the panel before he could activate it. Vex Solon stared at her, his composed exterior completely gone now, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. For the first time since the summit had begun, I saw him for what he truly was underneath the calm diplomatic mask, a leader who had gambled everything on a trap that was supposed to be impossible for us to escape. Nathan Cole's voice rang out from the eastern door. "I have it," he shouted. "The lock is disengaged." The door slid open, revealing a corridor beyond that led deeper into the station rather than back toward our shuttle. It was not the exit we had hoped for, but it was an exit, and in that moment, any path away from the chamber felt like a victory. Grace Whitfield turned to the rest of us, her expression sharp and focused. "We move together," she said. "No one gets left behind." I looked around at the small group that remained, each of us breathing hard from the sudden burst of conflict, each of us carrying hidden devices that had turned what should have been a massacre into a fighting chance. Ethan Marsh gave me a quick, tense nod, and I nodded back, understanding without words that we were about to move into whatever waited for us deeper in the station. Behind us, the remaining compact guards were regrouping, and Vex Solon's furious voice echoed through the chamber as he shouted orders in his own language, clearly determined not to let this failure be the end of his plan. As we moved through the eastern door and into the corridor beyond, I understood that the trap that had been set for us was only the beginning. Somewhere deeper in this station, there was more waiting, more danger, more of whatever the compact had truly prepared for this meeting. But for the first time since we had boarded that shuttle, I felt something other than fear settling into my chest. It was the quiet, steady confidence of a soldier who realizes his side had never truly been unarmed at all. We had walked into their trap, but we had brought our own answer with us. The corridor beyond the eastern door was narrower than the chamber we had left behind, lit by dim emergency lighting that cast long shadows against the metal walls. Our small group moved quickly but carefully, Nathan Cole taking point with his logistics equipment now clearly revealed as something far more sophisticated than anyone had let on, Laura Bennett covering our rear with calm, practiced awareness. Grace Whitfield kept pace beside me, her earlier calm now sharpened into something more urgent. As we moved, she began explaining, in short bursts between careful glances down each side passage, what I had suspected but never fully understood until this moment. "Command has known for months that the compact might attempt something like this," she said. "The peace offer came too easily, too quickly after years of stalemate. Intelligence suggested it was either a genuine breakthrough or an elaborate trap designed to eliminate our leadership in one strike." I asked her, quietly, why none of us had been told before boarding the shuttle. "Because if even one of us had known for certain," she answered, "we might have hesitated, might have given something away in our expressions or our movements. The compact needed to believe we walked in truly unaware. That belief is what allowed our preparations to work." It made a strange kind of sense, the sort of sense that only becomes clear once the danger has already passed the point of no return. We had been kept in partial darkness so that our fear, our nervousness, our uncertainty would all be genuine. impossible for even the most advanced observation systems to detect as deception. As we reached a junction where the corridor split into two directions, Nathan Cole raised a hand, signaling for us to stop. He knelt beside a small panel set into the wall, his fingers moving quickly across its surface as he accessed something within the station's systems. "There is a secondary reactor room down this left passage," he said quietly. "If the compact intends to use station systems against us, that room controls most of them." Grace Whitfield nodded, and without further discussion, we turned left, moving deeper into the station's aging infrastructure. Behind us, distant sounds of pursuit echoed faintly through the corridors, compact guards clearly reorganizing and beginning to search for the delegation that had slipped through their trap. As we approached the reactor room, Ethan Marsh suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. "Wait," he whispered. "Listen." I strained my ears and heard it too, a faint mechanical whirring coming from somewhere ahead, different from the reactor hum we had grown used to. It sounded almost like the engines of a small vessel, running quietly but unmistakably present. Sophie Lang moved forward cautiously, her defensive device still active, and peered around the corner ahead. She turned back to us with an expression of controlled surprise. "There is a docking bay just past the reactor room," she said, "and there is a ship inside it. Not one of ours." Laura Bennett's expression tightened. "That must be their contingency," she said. "In case something went wrong with the trap in the chamber, they would have needed a way to retreat and regroup, or to bring in additional forces quickly." Grace Whitfield considered this for a long moment, her eyes narrowing with the focus of someone calculating multiple possibilities at once. "If that ship exists," she finally said, "then we have two choices. We continue trying to reach our own shuttle through hostile corridors, or we consider whether that ship might serve our purposes better." Nathan Cole shook his head slightly. "That ship will be locked down tight," he said. "Compact security protocols on a vessel like that would take significant time to bypass, time we likely do not have." As if summoned by his words, the sound of pursuit grew louder behind us, compact guards clearly closing in from the direction we had come. We did not have the luxury of extended debate. Grace Whitfield made her decision quickly. "We push toward our own shuttle," she said. "Nathan, is there another route that avoids the main chamber entirely?" Nathan studied the station schematics on his wrist device for a few precious seconds before nodding. "There is a maintenance passage 2 levels down," he said. "It should connect back toward the docking ring where our shuttle is waiting." We moved quickly, descending through a narrow maintenance stairwell that clearly had not been used in years, thick dust coating every surface we touched. The air grew colder as we descended, the ambient hum of the station's systems replaced by an eerie quiet that made every sound we made feel far too loud. Halfway down the stairwell, our path was suddenly blocked. 2 compact guards emerged from a side passage, clearly having anticipated our attempt to reach the docking ring through an alternate route. For a brief, tense moment, both groups simply stared at each other, equally surprised by the sudden encounter. Laura Bennett reacted first, raising her device and disabling both guards' weapons before they could fully process what was happening. Sophie Lang followed immediately, using her defensive system to push both guards backward, creating just enough space for our group to slip past them and continue down the stairwell. As we reached the bottom level, Ethan Marsh suddenly stumbled, his foot catching on an uneven section of flooring. He caught himself against the wall, but not before letting out a sharp exhale of pain. "Are you hurt?" I asked quickly, helping him steady himself. "Just twisted it," he said through gritted teeth. "I can keep moving." Grace Whitfield glanced back at him with genuine concern before turning her attention forward again. "We are close," she said. "The docking ring should be just beyond this next passage." We pressed onward, Ethan limping slightly but refusing to slow our pace, until we reached a heavy door marked with faded symbols indicating the station's primary docking area. Nathan Cole worked quickly on the door's control panel, his earlier success with similar systems giving him confidence as his fingers moved across the interface. The door slid open, revealing our shuttle exactly where we had left it, its exterior lights still glowing softly in the dim docking bay. Relief washed over the group, visible in the way shoulders relaxed and breathing steadied, if only slightly. But that relief was short-lived. As we moved toward the shuttle, a familiar voice echoed through the docking bay, amplified by some hidden speaker system embedded in the station's structure. It was Vex Solan, his tone no longer calm or diplomatic, but sharp with barely restrained fury. "You will not leave this station," he announced. "Whatever tricks your people have brought with them, you are still trapped here, and I will not allow this failure to be reported back to my government." Grace Whitfield stopped walking, turning slowly to face the direction the voice had come from, even though Vex Solan himself was nowhere to be seen. "You are mistaken," she called back, her voice carrying clearly through the docking bay. "This was never a trap you controlled alone." As if her words were a signal, a deep vibration suddenly rippled through the entire station, strong enough that I felt it through the soles of my boots. Every light in the docking bay flickered briefly before stabilizing, and a new sound emerged, distant but unmistakable, the sound of powerful engines approaching from somewhere outside the station. Nathan Cole looked up sharply, a slow smile spreading across his face for the first time since we had boarded the shuttle back home. "That would be our escort," he said, "right on schedule." I stared at him in confusion, remembering clearly that our official orders had stated no additional support ships would accompany us to Halvorn Reach, per the strict terms of the summit. But as the vibration grew stronger, and the docking bay's exterior viewport revealed the unmistakable silhouette of a human warship decloaking in the space just outside the station, I understood that this, too, had been part of a plan far larger than anything I had been told. We had never truly been alone. And Vex Solan, wherever he was hiding within the station, was about to discover exactly how badly he had underestimated us. The warship that emerged from behind its cloaking field was smaller than the massive vessels I remembered from the height of the war, sleek and fast, clearly built for precision rather than brute force. Its name, painted along the hull in clear lettering, read the Ashcroft, and I felt something loosen in my chest at the sight of it, a tension I had been carrying since the moment we boarded the shuttle back home finally beginning to ease. Through the docking bay's viewport, we watched as the Ashcroft moved into position outside Halvorn Reach, its weapons systems clearly active but not yet firing, a silent statement of readiness rather than aggression. Nathan Cole explained quickly, as we all stood watching, that the ship had been trailing our shuttle at a significant distance the entire time, cloaked and silent, waiting for a signal that would only be sent if something went seriously wrong during the summit. "Command built in a failsafe," he said. "If we had not activated it within a set time frame, the Ashcroft would have assumed the summit was proceeding safely and simply returned to base." Ethan Marsh's device, the one he handed to you earlier, doubled as the trigger. I looked down at the small device still resting in my palm, realizing only now the true weight of what I had been holding onto throughout the entire encounter in the chamber. A simple defensive tool, and also a lifeline connecting us to help we had not known was watching over us the entire time. Vex Solan's voice echoed through the docking bay once more, this time carrying a noticeable edge of desperation beneath the anger. "This changes nothing," he announced. "You are still trapped within this station, and my forces still outnumber your small delegation." Grace Whitfield stepped forward, positioning herself where the hidden speaker system would clearly pick up her response. "Your forces outnumbering us was never the point," she called back. "The point was always whether you were willing to risk everything on a trap that depended entirely on us being exactly as unprepared as your terms demanded." There was a long pause before Vex Solan responded again, his voice quieter now, the confidence completely drained from his tone. "What do you want?" he finally asked. Grace glanced toward Laura Bennett, who gave a small nod, some silent understanding passing between the two women that told me this next part of the plan had been discussed long before we ever left our home fleet. "We want exactly what we came here for," Grace said, "a real peace agreement. But now, it will be negotiated on our terms, not yours." The docking bay fell silent for a long moment, broken only by the distant hum of the Ashcroft's engines outside the station. I found myself holding my breath, uncertain whether Vex Solon would choose to escalate the confrontation further or accept the reality of his failed plan. Finally, his voice returned, quieter still, almost defeated. "The station's lockdown will be released," he said. "My remaining forces will stand down. But know this, human, my government will deny any knowledge of what happened here today." Grace Whitfield allowed herself the smallest smile. "I expected nothing less," she said. True to his word, a soft chime echoed through the docking bay moments later, and the heavy door we had come through earlier slid open on its own, no longer sealed by the lockdown that had trapped us inside. Distant footsteps could be heard retreating deeper into the station, the remaining compact guards apparently withdrawing under orders from their defeated leader. Nathan Cole moved quickly to prepare the shuttle for departure, while Laura Bennett and Sophie Lang kept careful watch on the docking bay entrance, ensuring no last-minute betrayal would catch us off guard. Ethan Marsh, still limping slightly from his earlier fall, leaned against the shuttle's hull and let out a long breath. "That was closer than I ever want to experience again," he said, a shaky laugh escaping despite the exhaustion clearly written across his face. I clapped a hand on his shoulder, understanding the sentiment completely. "Agreed," I said. As we boarded the shuttle and prepared to leave Halvorn Reach behind, Grace Whitfield paused at the entrance, looking back one final time toward the corridor leading deeper into the station. I moved to stand beside her, curious what she was thinking in this quiet moment after everything that had happened. "Do you think he ever really wanted peace?" I asked her. Grace considered the question carefully before answering. "I think some part of his government did," she said. "Enough to make this offer in the first place. But I think fear won out over hope, at least for now. Fear of what a real peace would allow humanity to become." That thought stayed with me as our shuttle detached from the station and moved toward the waiting Ashcroft, which would escort us safely back toward human space. Through the shuttle window, I watched Halvorn Reach shrink into the distance, its scarred hull disappearing into the dark once more, a monument to a peace that had almost failed before it began. The journey back felt entirely different from the journey out, where before there had been tense silence and unspoken fear. Now there was quiet relief, occasional exhausted laughter, and the slow process of processing everything that had happened. Sophie Lang finally allowed herself to relax, folding away her defensive device and accepting a cup of water from Nathan Cole with a grateful smile. Laura Bennett spent much of the trip quietly reviewing files on her tablet, already preparing reports for command about everything that had transpired. I found myself sitting beside Ethan Marsh again, much like the beginning of our journey, except this time the silence between us felt comfortable rather than nervous. "You handled yourself well back there," he said eventually, "for someone who was told he would not need to fight today." I laughed quietly at that. "Command has a strange sense of humor," I said. Grace Whitfield, overhearing our conversation from her seat nearby, offered her own thought without looking up from the documents she was reviewing. "Command simply understands something the Compact has not yet learned," she said. "Hope and preparation are not opposites. We came here hoping for peace. We also came prepared for the possibility that hope alone would not be enough." Weeks later, after extensive review and quiet diplomatic pressure applied through channels far above my understanding, a new peace agreement was signed between humanity and the Serath Compact, this time under terms that reflected the reality of what had happened at Halvorn Reach. The recording our systems had captured during the failed trap, broadcast quietly through diplomatic channels back to the Compact's own government, exposed Vex Solon's actions in a way his leadership could not ignore or deny. He was removed from his position not long after, replaced by representatives more genuinely interested in the peace their own people desperately needed. Humanity did not dictate terms out of anger or desire for revenge. Instead, we simply refused to be caught unprepared again, insisting on verification measures, mutual trust-building exercises, and slow, careful steps toward a peace that could actually last, rather than one built on empty promises and hidden traps. I returned to active duty eventually, carrying with me a new understanding of what that mission had truly meant. We had walked into Halvorn Reach believing ourselves unarmed, vulnerable, entirely at the mercy of an enemy who had spent years trying to destroy us. And in a sense, that belief had been necessary for everything to work exactly as command intended. But the deeper truth I carried home was simpler than any of the tactical details, simpler than the hidden devices, or the disguised defenders, or the warship waiting silently in the dark beyond the station. Peace, real peace, was never going to come from either side pretending to be weaker than they truly were. It would only come from both sides finally understanding that strength and hope could exist together, that preparing for the worst did not mean abandoning belief in something better. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that moment in the chamber, watching Sophie Lang's calm hands unfold a hidden defense system from beneath a simple serving tray, watching Nathan Cole's quiet logistics officer disguise fall away to reveal someone who had trained for exactly this kind of crisis, watching Grace Whitfield stand fearlessly in front of a man who had planned to end her life only moments before. We went to that summit believing in peace enough to offer it a genuine chance, and we went prepared enough to make certain that belief would never be used against us again. That, I have come to understand, is not a contradiction at all. It is simply what it means to hope for something better while refusing to be foolish about the world as it actually is. Humanity carried both truths with us onto that station, hope in one hand and quiet readiness in the other, and in the end, it was that combination, not weapons alone and not hope alone, that finally opened the door toward a peace that might actually hold.